Well, here we are, the final episode of season 6 of Black Mirror. It's called Demon 79, and spoilers, of course, for the episode as I talk about it. So, the season's been kind of an up and down mixed bag of one quality, but also kind of like how much they feel like Black Mirror concepts. And I was quite critical of the last one for not really feeling like Black Mirror, but I will say this last episode, Demon 79, I think there's definitely a similar complaint to be had about it not really being Black Mirror. However, I do think that on its own terms, it is a much better episode than Maisie Day. I think the characters are more entertaining to watch. I think it's quite darkly funny at times. It's got a really cool aesthetic. It's going for a period piece. It's going for, obviously, 1979. But it has a very strict kind of style that it's going for. It wants to look like something that was shot then. It does a really good job of the period piece element. Even the font at the start made me think of Hammer, Hammer Horror, the British horror movie studio. I'd never seen the anthology show they did, Hammer House of Horror, which I think was a show in the 70s or 80s. I don't think I've ever seen any of that. So I don't know if this feels like that. But it certainly feels again like another anthology show rather than Black Mirror itself, because there's really nothing here to do with technology beyond just the broad sense of like advertising on TV plays into it a little bit, but that's pretty much it. But what it does do is it does have a really strong sense of social commentary, and it is really well paced. It's well directed. I think it's constantly just got a nice kind of like energy to it, a nice pulpy energy to it. So despite the fact that it's dealing with this main character named Nida, who is this character who is constantly just suffering bite-sized racism, like constantly throughout her life, being told not to eat her food because it smells too bad, being glanced at when people are talking about things changing, and the subject of immigration comes up. There's this, Republican, well, not Republican, it's the UK, but that's conservative is the word I was looking for. Politician campaigning for the local elections who comes into it a lot, and all these subjects kind of come up, and there's a kind of a constant dose of that to her throughout, and there's even a little bit of stuff more specific to her being a woman throughout. She's kind of creeped on by this guy who everyone knows murdered his wife, seemingly, but he's out anyway, in the world. But he sort of makes a couple of creepy passes at her, and so there's little things like that throughout. But despite tackling these subjects, which are quite serious and potentially quite depressing and have a lot of weight to them, it constantly does it in kind of a fun way, where there's always like little bits of humor in between. And I was always kind of I found myself smiling or laughing at how she reacted to certain things, or it's got a very sort of dry wit to it with the way she'll sort of stand there and stare when something happens or whatever. But it has those other elements that make it feel more pulpy, like she imagines killing people a couple of times early on, where it'll like cut to her smashing her coworker's face into the glass counter or whatever, and those are kind of fun moments, because ultimately what it's doing is it's showing you all this pent up rage and this pent up frustration that is building because of all of these little things she's having to endure constantly every day. And if anything, that's what the social commentary in this episode is kind of getting at. But actually, one of my favorite laughs of the episode, partly because she is this quiet girl who doesn't really talk much, is very timid most of the time, and that kind of leans into the pent up rage is all underneath idea. There's a moment where she's trying to lure the creepy guy, the wife murderer, to kill him, right? She's trying to kill him later in the episode, and he thinks he's going to have sex with her, and he's invited her back to his place, and they're going up, and because she's talking to this imaginary demon that, well, he may be imaginary, he may not be, we'll talk about that, but no one else can see him, so she's talking to this demon character who's telling her she has to kill people. And she tells him to shut the F up, I think, going up the stairs. And the creepy guy pops his head out and goes, "What was that?" And there's a lot of little moments where people will say, "Oh, she was talking to herself," or things like that. But when he says, "What was that?" she goes, "Can't wait to F you." And that line made me laugh so much. Partly because the type of character she is, it was just really surreal having her say that, but in this really kind of sweet way. But also the fact that this creepy guy just like bought it and just smiled back at her really creepily. Like it was always funny with its concepts and what it was doing, and I was super into like just kind of the vibe of it more than anything else. I think it had a good vibe the entire time, and you know it was actually entertaining to watch the story progress and build and crescendo, which is which is the biggest problem I had with Maisie Day, is that I just did not give a shit about what was going on throughout most of the episode. Whereas watching her, you know, have this pent up frustration, and then ultimately, of course, when the demon comes into it and tells her she has to kill 3 people in 3 days, or the world is going to break down into nuclear war, and it'll be her fault because she's, you know, found this little talisman thing in the basement of her workplace. So that's the setup of the episode. Is you've got, and the demon presents himself as this very flamboyant guy who she saw on TV. He basically explains that she must have like had a slight attraction to this guy on TV, this dancing guy, and that's why he's taken this form. But you know, we have this guy walking around and he's got like the big disco boots on, and like he's got this like furry coat thing, and he's very absurd and flamboyant in the appearance. But their chemistry as they're talking back and forth is entertaining, I think, throughout the whole episode. If I was going to critique something, you know, about its ultimate point, is that, you know, I'm still kind of mulling over what the ending is kind of meaning, because there's, you know, like she's set out to kill these 3 people, and of course the first one she's kind of just thrust into the situation and has to do it. The second time she's reluctant still, but it's a bit more premeditated. She kind of picks a victim this time and goes down that path. And then the third one, she makes a very definitive choice, and she's more kind of like targeted, and so she's less reluctant now, and it's more like, no, it's going to be this guy because of all these reasons. You know, she basically sees that this politician guy is effectively going to become. I was basically seeing like Nigel Farage in present day, like this is what this guy's going to become, or something to that effect, from just based on the snippets of the future we see, because the demon can like bring up the future and stuff, but she's more determined. And when we get to the end of the episode, like he's not happy with her choice, the demon, Gap is his name, and he leaves and disappears basically for the first time really since he's shown up. You know, he's kind of just always around once he does show up, and he finally leaves, and she's caught trying to kill this last guy, and the detective takes her in, and she's been interviewed, and she's explained to them all of these like reasons why she was killing these guys, and they look at her, of course, like she's crazy, like she's just went off the deep end, like she's talking about a demon and the apocalypse coming if she doesn't do it. And at that point the demon's been gone like for 5 minutes or so, which feels like a long time in the episode, and you start to think, oh, is that the point of this, is that there was never really a demon? This was just kind of like she did break, like everything she's going through every day eventually did break her and effectively turn her into the monster that the racists were trying to say she, or assume she was, throughout the entire episode, when she was this sweet, innocent, timid person that, you know, wouldn't harm a fly. But all this built up, and kind of like the logic in her brain got her to this point. And I think you can still argue that's what it is. Obviously, the demon does eventually show up and kind of takes her off to you know, like, because this was like it's kind of like a It's a Wonderful Life thing. He's basically trying to get his demon wings. This is his first rodeo, and he's, you know, if she fails, then he fails his audition to get into the upper demon ranks, and he'll be sent to oblivion forever if he fails. But he basically invites her to go with him, and she agrees because it's better than staying here, which felt, you know, a little bit of a commentary on its own. And then they leave as we legitimately get visuals of nuclear bombs dropping outside the window, which is a good moment. And the soundtrack of the episode is really good. This is one of the moments where one of the songs that feels of its era plays. There's a few scenes throughout the episode that have songs playing like that, and I think they all work quite well. I enjoyed those moments every time they hit. They all felt appropriate, you know, as opposed to try to do that ironic thing where we're using like all sorts of songs all over the place. And I think it feels a little bit overdone now. This did not feel like that though. This felt like, no, the song choices are all great. They fit the period piece aesthetic really well. The costumes, the cars, the brown color palette for the time period, like all of that stuff made it feel really good. But to get back to the ending and like the meaning, I'll go back and talk about the individual murders and stuff. But I think, I was sort of reading the ending what I had just said, which was like, this is not real, really. This was all in her head, and this was just kind of like leaving the world to burn and leaving it actually feels more appealing to her because this world's not been very accepting of her. I think is the quickest thing I can read from the ending, and it feels pretty right to read it that way. Not so much that she actually wants the world to end, and she spends most of the episode trying to save the world because she cares that all these people are going to die. She doesn't want this to happen to everyone. But fundamentally, when she feels rejected by the world, she's like, well, I'll just go off with the demon then and leave it because, why should she fight for this world? She's like, everyone she meets in this episode, like, on some level, the detective is very dismissive and his assistant seems better, but everyone else is pretty rough to varying degrees. We've got someone who murdered his wife, to this politician who's promoting like xenophobia and all that stuff. That keeps going, and then even just the smaller examples of people looking at her differently, being judgmental. There's this constant kind of like almost like the world's closing in on her like repeatedly, to the point where you think something bad might even happen to her at one point. There's a tense moment early on where she's opening her door and there's like two guys looking over at her, and she's clearly trying to like get in as quick as she can because she is a little bit scared. So in spite of all that, she still is trying to save everyone, right? She ultimately is justifying what she's doing by trying to save all the people who are good. Although it feels like the demon keeps like pointing out like how most of people are bad in some way. And we just kind of take his word for it to some extent. We know that the creepy guy did murder his wife. Other characters reference that. That seems to be a known thing. But the first guy she kills with the brick under the bridge, like, the demon convinces her that he's a good target because he sexually assaults his daughter. And we see some like glimpses of him coming into the room and stuff, but like we don't really know what, once we start to question if he's even real, the demon that is, like, we question all the information that he's giving her. Like, is that something that we can actually rely on? And we never really get a confirmation one way or the other. And it's interesting because there's a scene where the police go to the man's wife and they're getting the missing persons report effectively, and she's all worried. The daughter comes into the scene and she's like just quiet the whole time, and the mum's saying like something like, "Oh, these people are going to help find your daddy. You're worried sick, aren't you, honey?" And she's just sort of quiet and got this look the entire time. And it does kind of like play like this isn't just a simple, she's just this man's daughter who's worried that he's missing. It does kind of feel like there is maybe something dark going on, and that's why she's kind of not shell shocked, but just there's too much to simply for her to just like act like she's concerned. But that's really the only like possible hint we get that part of the story about this man was true. And it's not a lot to go on. It doesn't really prove anything. It's just kind of like it might kind of fit, with what we've heard, but it doesn't necessarily prove any of it. So it is a question to raise, and it's almost like the self justification for thinking she has to kill him. But you could read it as it's also like a serial killer's first victim, where he's just in the wrong place at the wrong time, or from her perspective, the right place at the right time, and she kind of psychs herself up into doing it. If you're reading it as the demon doesn't actually exist, and if the demon doesn't exist, then at the end of the episode, she's just kind of like letting her mind go, right? And she gets this peace of mind when everyone else is just dying, admittedly quite quickly, but they're all horrified in their final seconds while she's hopping off into the sunset with her demon best friend. So that was the first murder. It's well done, I think, because it is that sort of happenstance kind of moment, and this guy's kind of like standing in silhouette in the shadows under the bridge until he finally comes out. he does seem to be acting friendly enough, but it is, you do think, oh, she's maybe in a bit of a predicament here, because we've already seen she's felt in danger near where she lives, and this is quite close by, and it's, a dark place, middle of the night, all that stuff. And then the second murder, though, which is when she goes to the pub and she's sort of considering different victims, but ultimately it's the creepy guy who killed his wife. I think they said his name was Keith. And she follows him, he catches her following, and basically is like, oh, come back to mine then. And there's a lot of dark humor that comes out of all this part of the story that I really chuckled at. But this time, notably, like, it's not just one hit. Like, she like hammers this guy's head in repeatedly, who notably kind of like catches her doing it and basically just lets it happen. He kind of sees this as his penance for what he's done. Like, he expected some sort of comeuppance at some point. But she repeatedly bashes his head in, and it's a bit more vicious. It's a bit like an actual killer doing a killing, if you will. But there's even more hilarity after that, though, because the guy's brother shows up, and she effectively has what I can only describe as, how when you do like the silly fight where two people will just sort of like go like that with their hands, right? As if they're trying to hit each other, but they're scared of actually getting hurt themselves. That effectively happens with Nida and this guy's brother, except she's holding a hammer and the brother's holding a knife. So they're fighting like school children who don't want to hit each other, really, but they're also holding dangerous weapons in their hands, which honestly really made me laugh. I think she does like an awkward kick at one point as well, which really started to get me going. But all this was, I thought, hilarious. And then eventually there's a struggle, and she stabs him with his knife, and like, she does have guilt over this. She asks the demon, like, was he a good person? Was he a bad person? And he can't say that he was bad. Like, he was kind of normal. He was fine. But so she feels this guilt over this because of that. And then the third victim, which is the pilot, and what I think was really good actually about the writing of this episode is that a lot of these characters are introduced. The one under the bridge is the only one that kind of comes out just that moment itself. The politician is set up earlier in the episode between campaigning, coming to the store, talking in the street. Keith was a customer in the store earlier on, so they set up all these characters. And even the fact that she has multiple potential victims get into the third killing, because she's like, her co-worker's this awful person who's so lazy, but constantly blames Nida for being lazy and constantly makes little comments about her. And I feel like most people who have worked a regular job of some kind have worked with this person in some capacity, right? You can just, like, the way they reshape the truth, so they're always the one that's hard done by, even though they're the laziest person that works there. Like, most people have encountered someone like this in their life, and if you haven't, it might have been you. Maybe not, but most people, I think, have encountered someone like this. And then you top it all off with some racism on top, just to complete the shit pie. Her boss at work also drops lots of little racist comments, so he's like a potential victim, and it's like, oh, maybe it's him, maybe it's her. And then in walks the politician, and this is someone who is actively trying to like get people to vote for him, and he's anti-immigration. That's come up a couple times. And then she's like, what about him? What's his future like? And that's when we get a glimpse of like all the things he's going to do in his political career. And she's like, definitely him. Like, he's going to cause so much trouble in the future for so many people. He's the right target. And he tries to talk her out of it, the demon, because like apparently hell are quite fond of what he's going to do, because he's going to cause a lot of misery. So they don't want that. Which actually, that's another point I've even glossed over, is that the creepy guy Keith didn't count. It turns out because he murdered someone, he doesn't count as a sacrifice. It's just lucky that they got the brother as well at the same time. So he counted as a second victim. And even that kind of felt like the demon works in this kind of bureaucratic hell. Like, there's these goalposts that move, where even when she's doing, that fits into the themes actually, is even when she's being a model citizen and she's doing what everyone's saying she's supposed to do, they somehow still find a way to tell her she's doing it wrong, and that's kind of what her co-worker's like she's like constantly telling her, don't eat in here, don't do that. Like, I think what it she says early on, like, there's a customer here and he does like, I'm on my lunch break. And it's like, yeah, but my lunch break starts in 5 minutes. So if I take a customer now, it'll cut into my lunch break. Like the backwards logic of that is it's I believe it. I absolutely believe that someone would make this argument because, like I say, we've all met someone like this. I've met a few of them over my years, and yeah, so I think all of that, by the time we get to this point in the episode and there's like three like actual potential victims that all feel built up enough to be the last victim, the one that she picks makes the most sense, but like the other options are completely like valid, like they are. Hell, there's even a moment where the politician's talking to the coworker, and he kind of does that. It's almost like they're implying that he's also demonic in some way because he does this thing where he stares at her, and kind of like even though the coworker's like a fan of his and is a fan of him again after this scene, there's a little moment where she's a little bit scared of him, and it kind of feels like he's doing like, like almost that Dracula like hypnosis kind of stare where he's like bringing her under his spell. It's just a little quirky scene just to kind of get your brain thinking about that he actually might be from hell himself. So, and there's a big turning point here where she takes this red leather jacket that she was told that she would never pull off before. Again, it was another moment where she was being belittled by her coworker, and she walks out in slow motion in the red jacket, and the blood-stained jacket she had before is like on the mannequin, which felt like a surefire way of getting caught eventually. Like, I'm sure next day in the store, someone's going to notice that, and it might become an issue for staying, out of suspicion, I suppose. And things are kind of starting to close in a little bit here. The police are kind of tracked her down because she was in the pub the night the other guy was there, and he's getting closer, he's following her, and he does seem like a better person by the time he actually catches her, because the way he talks to her does not feel bad. It feels as nice as he possibly could given the circumstances, even though he's been very dismissive of everything throughout the episode up until that point. But I think the episode is interesting because it puts you in the shoes of this character and shows her frustration, and sort of shows how like the temptation, and like once she gets a taste for the murdering, it kind of rises and it keeps being justified, and in a kind of a weird way it kind of mirrors almost what the politician keeps saying, where he keeps justifying everything he's saying and doing because of these things that he's saying. All these bad things will happen if we don't do this. It kind of felt like it was mirroring that a little bit as well. So the social commentary is absolutely there in this one. It just doesn't really feel like Black Mirror, I guess, because it has nothing to do with technology. Much like the last episode, it's a supernatural thing. And yeah, there's an argument here that it's not really supernatural, that it is just psychological, and it is just her head, and that makes it just as interesting, honestly. Either one works. If anything, it probably feels a bit more poignant if it's just psychological, and you sort of like interpret everything that goes on in her head, like everything with the demon, as being a coping mechanism or something she's driven to. And it's that idea, if you treat someone like an outcast long enough, eventually they might actually properly become one. Outcast isn't the right word given what I just said, but you know what I mean. So yeah, I think it's a really solid story, and I had fun with a lot of it. Despite the heavy topics that it's kind of dipping into, it's usually quite entertaining and at times very funny. Despite that, I think it's very easy to get into the main character and enjoy her being challenged, and even enjoy when she does let loose and kill people, because you kind of like the people around her kind of deserve it. You're kind of enjoying her awkwardness at doing it, because she isn't this, hulking Jason Voorhees, like intimidating guy. She is this, tiny 5'3" woman who's just whacking away at a hammer and hoping for the best that she might pull off a murder. So it makes its point, and it's entertaining, and I did enjoy the visuals of the ending. But I think you would be right in criticizing it for not being super Black Mirror in a lot of ways. And maybe the fact that there's a couple of episodes like that this season maybe just says that Brooker, like, he's explored most of what he can or wants to with what the original idea of Black Mirror was, and he's kind of just moving beyond it into general genre anthology stories, as opposed to sticking specifically to the key idea of technology and possible technology. Because the social commentary's always been a part of Black Mirror for sure, but it's always been tied to how it's influenced or utilized with technology or something akin to that. Whereas this feels, it kind of takes place before a lot of the technology that's used in most Black Mirror episodes even exists. Like I say, like, you've got people on TV and you've got the media being used for the politician to promote his thing and all that, but it's not really a big element of it. It just kind of feels like, yeah, that's what obviously is happening. Maybe you could read into her taking the image of someone she was attracted to on TV to be this like imaginary friend, or indeed the demon takes the image because she liked him. Maybe you could take that as, something there, but again, it feels like such a minor part of the overall story that I don't think it's really the focus of it. It's very much this character study that has a good sense of humor, and there's definitely stories that it makes me think of. It's not the first one that came to my mind is American Psycho. It doesn't really feel like American Psycho, but I understand why my mind jumped to that. You're sort of following a character who is getting into murdering people, but there's kind of like a sense of humor laid over the top and sort of a quirkiness to it. And I think that's very much what this falls into. There's probably better examples that fit this better than that does, though. But it's definitely, they're not a million miles out of each other's realm in terms of like comparison. But this, though, admittedly has a much more sympathetic main character, whereas American Psycho, like, Patrick Bateman is this deplorable image of a yuppie, and he is like, he's the opposite of Nida in many ways. He's the guy at the top of his game who cares about his business card because everything's superficial and he doesn't have any real problems, so he's created all these silly ones because he's a rich asshole. Nida, on the other hand, is facing all these very real issues, and it's about how all those things will drive her to this, as opposed to what Patrick Bateman. So I think the comparison is there, but they're very much two different ends of that spectrum in a lot of ways. But I had a good time. Like, I had fun. I enjoyed the episode. It went in quick despite being the second longest of the season. I was entertained by Nida's antics, and I was entertained by the demon. And I thought it was generally very, enjoyable, I guess. I mean, that's basically how I'd sum it up. So that is Demon 79, is the final episode of this season of Black Mirror. Been a weird season for sure. I think I found stuff to enjoy in the first 3 episodes, and I enjoyed the last one as well. I think Maisie Day is the stinker of the season that I do not think had very many redeeming qualities at all. I think the rest of them on some level were entertaining. But they've all had some kind of problem. This one doesn't really feel like Black Mirror, which to its credit is probably not as big of a problem as some of the other things, whereas Beyond the Sea, maybe, like, it didn't fulfill all the things I wanted it to, so it felt, I was a little disappointed with ultimately where it went. The first episode, Joan is awful. Loved the concepts, but it maybe did too many by the end, where it kind of lost what the original concept was a bit by then. Second episode goes into silly territory, but I enjoyed it for that silliness, but it kind of lost its Black Mirror message by the end, and the last 5 minutes was kind of tacked on. So so definitely a mixed bag of a season, but 4 out of 5, I would say I had a good enough time watching that I was happy I watched them. I was happy I watched 4 out of 5 of these episodes, which isn't bad by any means, but none of them are best of all time Black Mirror episodes. None of them even, scratch the top 5 episodes of the show. And you kind of hope there's at least one of those in a new season, and it's been a couple of seasons now without one. I think season 4 had one of those episodes, and that was USS Callister, and we've not had one since. Does it need any more? Probably not. Like, if it keeps continuing at this quality that these 4 episodes out of the 5 had, I'll probably still enjoy it. I'll still enjoy talking about them, and the experience will be quite good, but it definitely isn't as special as it can be or has been in the past. So, yeah. As far as where this episode ranks for me this season, it's tough. This may technically be my favorite of the season. Actually, I think I had the most fun with this one overall. I think it had the strongest style and consistent style and tone. You know, like the aesthetic of the time period, the way it used its music to enhance that. I think it was the most consistent throughout. So this might actually be my favorite of the season. Now that I'm thinking about it. But anywho, that is Demon 79. Let me know what you thought of this one in the comments, and obviously hit the like button. The like button's always important. If you're not doing anything else, hit the like button. But that is the show. Thank you once again for watching or listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?